The wind snapped through the pines like a whip, tearing through the silence of late autumn in the Montana mountains. Snow fell in slow, heavy sheets, muffling the world in white. Jedediah Stone, 6'6" in his worn boots, wide as a barn door, beard streaked gray beneath a weathered brown, Stetson pulled his duster tighter against the cold and nudged his horse forward. He hadn't planned to take the South Ridge Trail home, but something about the sky had bothered him. It had that look low and bruised, like it was hiding something. The trail curved, and that's when he smelled it. Smoke. Not the comforting curl of pine wood in a hearth, but the sharp, bitter reek of ruin. Burning tar. Oil. The smell of something done on purpose. He dug his heels into Thunder's sides and galloped toward the rise. At the top, he reined in and stared. Below, a small homestead, what had been one lay in charred wreckage. The house had collapsed in on itself, still smoldering. The barn was gone. Scorched earth surrounded the scene like a black scar on the snow-covered land. Then he saw them. 2 figures huddled beside what remained of a stone chimney, motionless against the white. He dismounted fast, boots crunching into ash-laced snow. They were girls, small, 6 years old, maybe. Twins, their faces smeared with soot, their dresses torn and stiff with smoke. One clutched a blackened wooden doll to her chest. The other had her arm curled protectively around her sister, eyes wide with exhaustion and distrust. Jed crouched low, letting the snow settle into his shoulders, the cold sting his skin. He knew what fear looked like. He knew what abandonment carved into a child's face, and these girls wore it plain. He spoke low. "Name's Jed. I won't hurt you." The bolder of the 2 stepped in front of her sister, feet bare in the snow. Her voice cracked when she asked, "Are you one of the bad men?" Jed's throat worked once before he answered, "No. Get on my horse now." For a second, neither moved. Then the braver one nodded. He lifted her carefully, felt how light she was, bones and soot, and silence. Then he lifted the second, who didn't speak at all, just clutched her doll tighter. He swung into the saddle behind them, wrapped his coat around both, and turned Thunder toward the trees. As the wind howled behind them, he didn't look back at the ruins. Back at his cabin, tucked deep between 3 ridges and a frozen creek, Jed dismounted and carried the girls inside. The fire was out. He moved fast logs, flint, flame. He set them close to the hearth, wrapped in a quilt patched together from old army blankets and deer hide. They didn't cry. That worried him more than anything. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The one who'd spoken earlier answered, voice no louder than the snow falling outside. "Clara. This is June." He nodded. "You hungry?" 2 tiny nods. He dug out what he had, beans, a slab of dried elk, 3 pieces of cornbread gone a little stale. He boiled water for tea, added wild mint, stirred in honey, then paused. He didn't own any mugs fit for children. He handed them each a tin cup and held his breath as they drank. The girls ate like wolves. Jed watched from across the room, arms crossed over his chest, heart tightening with each bite they took. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. No one sets fire to a family homestead in the middle of a snowstorm by accident. Afterward, when their bellies were full and their eyes heavy, Jed made up the bed. He spread extra quilts, tucked the girls in, and pulled the bear-hide curtain across the alcove to give them privacy. Then he sat in his chair by the fire, rifle across his knees. He didn't sleep. At dawn, Clara stirred. She crept out from behind the curtain, doll clutched to her chest. "You didn't go," she said. He met her eyes. "Didn't plan to." "Men came in the night. They told Papa to sign a paper." Mama screamed. Then fire. Jed's jaw clenched. "Junie thinks they'll come back," Clara whispered. "She hasn't said a word since." He stood slowly, crossed to her, and crouched down. "They won't get to you. I promise." That night, while the girls slept, Jed stepped outside into the deep silence of snow. He walked around the cabin, studying tracks. His snares had been sprung by someone with hands, not paws. He found boot prints, 3 men, moving carefully, watching. They'd been there, watching the cabin, watching him. He came back inside, bolted the door, and reloaded every round. Then he knelt beside the bed, gently pulled the quilt up to Clara's chin, then Junie's. Junie didn't stir, but her hand, still clutching the doll, relaxed slightly. Jed stood slowly and turned toward the fire. He lifted the rifle from the wall and stood before the window, snow thick on the sill, moonlight spilling like milk across the floor. He muttered to no one in particular, the words sharp and final. "If they want these girls, they're gonna have to come through me." The first time it slipped out, Jed didn't know what to do with it. He was skinning a rabbit behind the cabin, hands working on muscle memory, while the morning sun spilled weak light over the frosted clearing. Clara stood nearby, holding the bucket for water with her usual stubborn determination. Junie stayed closer to the steps, still quiet, watching the trees like they might move. "Is it okay if I call you Papa Jed?" Clara asked, eyes squinting up at him. His knife stopped mid-slice. She said it with a shrug, like she was asking to borrow an apple, but her voice trembled just enough for him to hear the truth. She was daring herself to hope. Jed didn't answer right away. He kept working, finishing the cut, rinsing the blade in the snow. But inside, something shifted, like a frozen creek beginning to thaw beneath his ribs. "If that's what you want," he said finally. Clara smiled and nodded, like the matter had been settled. From that moment on, he was Papa Jed. He hadn't earned it yet, but he would. Days in the mountains taught him to read signs, the arc of a hawk circling, the way snow bent under certain weight, the tone of thunder's whinny when something wasn't right. Now he turned those instincts toward the girls. Clara was quick, not just physically, though she darted through trees like a rabbit, but with her mind. She remembered trails after walking them once, could tie knots tight enough to hold a deer, and had an uncanny knack for spotting things others missed. Junie didn't speak much, not since the fire, but Jed noticed she had an edge of intuition no one taught her. She'd stop walking moments before a branch snapped underfoot, or glance toward the ridge right before a fox broke cover. She moved with the caution of someone who didn't trust the world, and given what she'd seen, he didn't blame her. Jed started training them slow. He taught them to find edible plants, to boil water from snow, to avoid leaving tracks in soft earth. They learned to hide, not like children playing games, but with the bone-deep seriousness of survival. He showed them where to step on rock instead of ground, how to use shadow and stillness. He didn't soften the truth for them. The world they lived in wasn't kind. Sometimes they trained with sticks as pretend rifles, learning how to crawl on elbows and bellies through brush. Clara laughed when she beat him to a marked tree. Junie didn't laugh, but when she reached the finish, she'd look up and give the barest of nods. That nod meant everything. Then came the footprints. Jed found them early one morning. 4 sets, horsemen. They'd passed through the edge of his property, just beyond the riverbed. Not close enough to be casual, but not so far that it didn't mean something. He returned to the cabin, quiet and alert, his rifle loaded and leaning near the door. By dusk, they came. Thunder gave the first warning, a low, sharp snort. Jed stepped onto the porch, calm and ready, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. The girls were inside. They knew what to do. Hide under the floorboards, in the narrow crawl space beneath the hearth where he'd shown them. 4 riders crested the path, dressed like lawmen but riding like bounty hunters. Dusty boots, low brims, guns rode easy on their hips. One of them wore a tin star. Jed recognized the man beneath the badge. Sheriff Otis Murphy from Copper Falls, a man known more for turning blind eyes than enforcing law. "Evening, Jed," Murphy called, dismounting with an exaggerated smile. Jed didn't smile back. "You're a long way from your usual rounds, Sheriff." "Well, word travels," Murphy said, adjusting his gloves. "You hear about the fire down at the Hicks homestead?" Jed kept his face unreadable. "I did. Tragic. Whole place went up. Parents didn't make it out. But folks say the girls might have survived." Jed said nothing. Murphy's eyes shifted to the cabin behind him. "You wouldn't have seen anyone. Maybe 2 little girls, 6 or so. Would have been cold, hungry, scared." Jed stepped down from the porch, placing himself between the sheriff and the door. "Can't say I have," he replied. The other riders didn't dismount. Their hands hovered too close to their holsters for Jed's liking. They weren't deputies. They weren't here for answers. They were here for confirmation. Murphy cleared his throat, his false smile cracking. "See, there's a bit of a situation. That Hicks land? Turns out it's sitting on a vein of something mighty valuable. Garrett Mining Company's already staked interest. Problem is, with the parents gone, well, any claim would pass to the children, if they're still alive." Jed let the silence stretch until it pulled tight. "And if they're not, then the claim reverts to the territory." "Garrett buys it outright. Legal and clean," Jed's voice dropped. "And if they are alive?" Murphy's eyes narrowed. "Then someone needs to take custody. Can't have little girls running wild in the mountains." Jed didn't move. "That someone wouldn't be you." Murphy took a step forward. "We're just trying to find the girls, Jed. That's all. If you see anything, I'll let you know." Jed held his gaze until Murphy looked away first. After a beat, the sheriff gave a nod, turned, and swung back into his saddle. "We'll be around for a couple more days. You see anything, you send word." Jed watched them ride out, then didn't move for a long time. That night, after the girls had eaten and gone to bed, he pulled the floorboard loose again. Inside, beneath a layer of old maps and folded hides, was a parcel wrapped in oilskin. The land deed. Thomas Hicks had given it to him months ago. For safekeeping, the man had said, just in case. Back then, Jed hadn't thought he'd need it. Now he did. He set it on the table, lit a lamp, and read the words by flickering flame. It was legitimate, signed, stamped, sealed. Those girls owned something, something worth killing for. He heard soft footsteps. Clara stood in the doorway, the doll clutched against her chest. "I heard them," she whispered. "The men." Jed turned to her slowly. "How much?" "Enough. They're looking for us, for our land." Junie appeared beside her, small and silent. Her eyes were wide, dark. Her voice was barely a breath. "That man, he came before." The night the fire started, Jed stood, walked to the girls, and knelt. "If they knew you were alive," he said softly, "they'd come to finish the job." Clara looked him dead in the eye. "So we hide better." Junie reached out, placing her small hand in his. And for the first time, Jed realized these girls weren't waiting to be rescued. They were ready to fight to survive, and they'd chosen him as their shield. The storm came fast, like a wolf that had caught the scent of something warm and breathing. By mid-afternoon, the sky had gone white, the kind of white that presses down on the land and eats all the edges. Trees vanished into mist. The wind screamed through the mountains, and the snow fell sideways, thick, angry, relentless. Jed latched the door with a heavy iron bar and stuffed thick burlap into the window cracks. They'd be trapped for days. Thunder was sheltered in the lean-to with a saddle blanket and feed. The woodpile was stacked high, water melted and stored in barrels. Jed had hunted hard the past week. The shelves were lined with beans, dried meat, jars of preserved berries, smoked fish. They'd be all right, or so he thought. On the second night, Junie started to cough. By morning, her cheeks were flushed red and her small body shivered beneath the quilts. Her breath came fast and shallow. Clara held her sister's hand, sitting as still as a stone. Jed knelt beside the bed, laid the back of his hand against Junie's forehead. Fever. Bad one. He moved fast. Snow into pots, water to boil, bark from the willow tree stripped and steeped. Joseph had taught him long ago that willow bark helped lower fever when they were camped high above the Snake River, trading silence for brotherhood. But that had been years ago. Jed hadn't nursed a soul since. He pressed a cup of the bitter tea to Junie's lips. "Come on now, little one." "You got a sip," she tried, failed. The second time, she got a swallow down. Clara hovered close. "Is she going to be okay?" Jed didn't answer. Truth was, he didn't know. The cabin felt smaller with every hour. The walls sweated with heat from the fire. Steam drifted from wet laundry hanging above the stove. Outside, the storm wailed like something grieving. Inside, a child struggled to breathe. Jed didn't sleep. He kept vigil through the long, brutal nights. He changed cloths on her forehead, lifted her gently to drain her lungs, rubbed her back with salve made from pine and bear fat. He told stories in a low voice, mostly to Clara, but for Junie's sake, too. Sometimes she stirred. Once she opened her eyes. "Papa Jed, I'm right here, baby. You just rest." The next morning, Clara brought him a mug of tea. Her hands shook. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were red and raw. "You should sleep." He looked at her and felt something break. "You're 7, he whispered. "You shouldn't be the one taking care of me." "You're taking care of her," Clara said, and reached out to touch his hand. "And she knows it." When Junie's fever spiked on the third day, Jed did the only thing left to him. He wrapped her tight, carried her outside into the biting air, and lowered her into a snow bath. Her body spasmed, but her eyes opened. She gasped, her chest hitching, and coughed hard. He pulled her out and carried her in, wrapping her in every dry blanket he owned. Clara helped. No complaints. No fear. Only the focused determination of a girl who had already lost too much. That night, as Junie lay quiet again, Jed sat in his chair, hands trembling from exhaustion. His eyes drifted to the hearth. Firelight flickered across the worn metal hanging on the wall. Union Scout, Ghost of Shiloh. The stories folks told were only half true. They didn't know the part where his command had misfired, where 3 of his own men had died because of his bad call. They didn't know about Samuel Morrison, the boy from Ohio who'd followed him straight into friendly fire. Jed hadn't let himself think about Samuel in years. But now, with Junie's breathing ragged and death crowding the cabin again, the old weight came back. He stood, knelt beside the bed, placed his hand gently on her chest, still rising. Shallow, but rising. Please, he thought, to no one and nothing. Just please. The wind howled harder. By dawn, the fever broke. Jed noticed it when he went to change the cloth and found her skin cool to the touch. Her lips were no longer blue. When he leaned in, Junie opened her eyes and blinked slowly. "I had a dream," she whispered. Jed leaned closer. "What kind of dream?" "Mama said I had to stay," she murmured, "because Clara needs me." "And you do too," he bit down on the ache in his throat. "I reckon your mama was right." Clara came awake soon after, rubbing her eyes and climbing over the blankets. "Is she better?" Jed nodded. "She's gonna be just fine." Clara didn't cry. Instead, she moved to the hearth, opened her small pack, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this yesterday," she said, holding it out. In case, in case she went to heaven. Jed took the note. The handwriting was messy but careful, every letter shaped with love and fear. If Junie goes to heaven, please don't be sad. She loves you so much. So do I. You're the best Papa Jed in the world. He folded it slowly and tucked it inside his vest pocket, close to his heart. She's not going anywhere, he said. Then he looked at Clara. Neither are you. Outside, the storm began to die. The snow softened its bite. The sky cleared a little over the ridge, and for the first time in years, Jed felt warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Inside this little cabin, something had survived the storm, something more fragile than breath, and more lasting than scars. A family. Jed heard the footsteps before he saw them. Slow, hesitant, snow crunching beneath worn soles. He stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting casually across his arm, but eyes sharp. The storm had passed days ago, but the land was still hushed, blanketed in white. No wind, just the sound of something or someone moving along the tree line. Then she stepped into view. A woman, not tall, wrapped in a faded wool shawl. Her dark hair was tangled and windblown, face gaunt but proud. Behind her, a boy, maybe 8, followed with shoulders squared like a man twice his age. His cheeks were red from cold, his boots too small, and he carried nothing but a sling pack across his back. They stopped at the edge of the clearing. Jed didn't speak. Neither did she. The silence stretched. "I'm not here to steal," the woman finally said. Her voice was rough, dry from the road. "We're just looking for somewhere safe." For the night, Jed's jaw twitched. He looked at the boy, who met his gaze without flinching. Clara and Junie stood just inside the cabin, peering around the door frame. "Name?" Jed asked. "Maria Santos," the woman said. "This is Diego." My son Jed didn't lower the rifle. "Where are you coming from?" "We were camped down by Coldwater Creek. Had a wagon. My husband died 2 winters ago, so we'd been moving place to place, trying to find honest work." She took a shallow breath. "Then Garrett's men came through. Said we were squatting on company land, burned everything. We barely got out." Jed studied her. The name Garrett landed in his gut like a stone. He didn't ask for more, didn't need to. He lowered the rifle and stepped aside. "Come in. We've got fire and food." Maria blinked just once. Then she nodded and guided Diego forward. Inside, the girls whispered excitedly behind their hands. Diego gave them a small nod, shy but firm. Junie nodded back. Clara didn't hide her curiosity. Maria stood by the door, arms wrapped around herself. She looked like she hadn't eaten a full meal in days. Jed pulled down the tin kettle, filled it with water, and set it on the stove. "We don't have much, but you're welcome to share," he said. She gave a soft laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've lived on less than a slice of cornbread and hot water. This feels like a feast already." Over the next few hours, something shifted inside the cabin. It wasn't dramatic, just small things. Maria warmed her hands by the fire. Jed caught her quietly humming to herself as she tucked Diego in with the girls. Then she started picking things up, tidying dishes, sweeping ash off the floor. Not like a guest, but like someone reclaiming a space, like someone trying to make a home again. Jed didn't stop her. The girls took to Diego quickly. Clara challenged him to a snowball fight before breakfast. Junie watched from the doorway at first, then joined in, her laughter soft and brief. For the first time in weeks, the sound of children playing filled the air. Maria helped Junie stitch a tear in her dress. She made cornbread from scratch, using the last of the cornmeal Jed had saved. She even found a patch of soil near the shed, where the snow was thin, and began turning it over with bare hands. "Trying to coax something green out of this place?" Jed asked one afternoon. She shrugged. If the land gives nothing back, at least I tried. He watched her work, sleeves rolled up, earth under her nails. There was something solid in the way she moved, like she'd carried too much for too long, but still kept going. He respected that. They didn't talk much, but sometimes their silence meant more than words. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Clara nestled between Diego and Junie, all three of them tangled under quilts. Jed found Maria sitting on the porch steps. The stars were out, clear, cold, the kind of sky that made a man remember how small he really was. "I should thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to." "No," she insisted. "I do. Most men would have turned us away, especially after seeing what I've come from." Jed looked at her, brow furrowed. "I've done things," she continued, "things I'm not proud of. When my husband died, the choices got harder. I worked where I could, cleaned for miners, cooked at camps. And when that wasn't enough, I survived. However, I had to." She didn't look at him, eyes fixed on the snow-covered trees. "I'm not asking forgiveness. Just understanding Jed didn't move." After a long while, he said, "You made it out. You kept your boy alive." "That's more than most." Maria blinked fast, her breath fogged in the night air. "I didn't expect kindness." Right there, flapping in the wind next to a missing mule notice, was a fresh, wet poster. "Wanted, Jedediah, Stone alias, the ghost of Shiloh. Crime, unpardoned military conduct, treason, theft approach with caution, armed and dangerous. Reward, $500, dead or alive, issued by order of Silas Garrett, authorized agent, Federal Mining Company." Jed stared at it for a long moment, not because it shocked him, he'd been waiting for Garrett to make a move, but because of the name they dragged back into the light. Ghost of Shiloh. The last time anyone had called him that was 15 years ago, in a Union camp hospital, when he'd walked out of the woods alone, covered in someone else's blood. He tore the poster down, folded it slowly, tucked it into his coat, and rode home without saying a word. By the time he reached the cabin, the clouds had darkened. Snow flurried again, light but steady. He unsaddled Thunder, tossed a glance toward the tree line, still quiet, and stepped inside. Maria was mixing something on the stove. Junie sat wrapped in a blanket on the rug, drawing shapes in the ashes by the hearth. Clara and Diego were sorting nails by size on the table, giggling over who could stack more without falling. Jed walked in silent as shadow. Maria looked up. "You're early." He held the poster out to her. She read it, eyes narrowing. "They're calling you a criminal?" He didn't answer, just nodded once, heavy. Clara padded over, read it over Maria's arm. "That's not true," she said. Jed didn't meet her eyes. Later that night, after the children had gone to sleep and the fire had burned low, Jed stood near the hearth, staring into the coals. "I wasn't always the man you see," he said. Maria set her tea down, folded her hands in her lap. "Tell me." Jed took a long breath, one that seemed to reach all the way back to another lifetime. "Shiloh was bad," he said, "but the worst came after. I was lead scout for the 32nd. We were sent to clear out Confederate holdouts near the Tennessee line. Word came of a unit trapped behind enemy lines. I made the call to push through a ravine I thought was safe." He paused. "It wasn't." He closed his eyes. "Ambush. We lost 12 men in 15 minutes. One of them was a boy I'd pulled out of Ohio with my own hands. His name was Samuel Morrison. Just turned 18, Maria's gaze didn't flinch. You blamed yourself. I still do. Did the army? No. They said it was a mess of orders, fog of war, but the whispers started, that I led them into it on purpose, that I went too far, too fast. Then someone gave me the name, the Ghost of Shiloh, and it stuck. I left before the next campaign, vanished into the mountains." He looked toward the room where the children slept. I didn't want to be a part of anything again. I figured if I kept to myself, maybe the world would forget. Maria walked to him, slow and sure. She placed her hand on his arm. "We all have ghosts," she said. "Some protect, some destroy." He let the words settle. Then Clara's voice rose behind them, soft and certain. "You saved us." "That's what matters," Jed turned. She stood in the doorway, holding Junie's hand. The younger girl nodded quietly, eyes wide but steady. "You didn't lead anyone into danger," Clara said. "You lead us home." Jed had no answer for that, not one he could say out loud, so he just knelt and pulled both girls into a hug, so firm it left no room for fear. Later, when the cabin was still again, he stepped outside. The stars were out, sharp and brittle. He unfolded the poster one more time, studied the lines of his own face printed in black ink. The jaw was right, though the eyes were colder. A man who hadn't been loved. He burned it in the fire barrel. Then he whispered to the wind like he was speaking to someone long gone. "I tried to lay that name to rest." He paused. "But if Garrett wants a ghost, I'll give him one." The knock came just after sundown. Not a timid tap, but the kind that made you reach for a rifle before you opened the door. Jed moved slow. One hand stayed near the Winchester propped by the firewood rack. The other unlatched the door. When he opened it, the man on the other side lifted his chin with a tired smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Evenin', Stone." "Joseph." Joseph Crow Feather had the look of a man who'd ridden hard and slept little. Snow clung to the fringes of his wool coat, and his gray-streaked braids dripped water onto the porch floorboards. He stood a little hunched, one arm cradling a bruised rib. Jed stepped aside. "Get in before the cold finishes what the trail started." Inside, the fire was down to coals. Maria added a log, casting orange light against the walls. The children were asleep already, huddled under quilts. Joseph's boots didn't make a sound as he crossed the floor and sat by the hearth. He didn't speak for a long moment, just stared into the flames. Jed poured coffee, handed him a cup. "You came through the pass?" Joseph nodded. "Barely." Then he set the cup down and said it plainly. "Garrett's bringing in men. 8 of them. All hired guns. Not your average saloon drunks either. These boys are serious. Military training, scoped rifles, full kits." Dynamite. Jed didn't flinch. "He's planning a war." Joseph nodded again. "And not just that. He's laying plans to burn the upper ridge. Says the Ricks homestead fire was an accident. He wants this one to look the same. Says if the whole area goes up, nobody can prove a damn thing." Jed's jaw tightened. He's going to wipe it all. The cabin, the deed, the kids, everything. Maria leaned against the doorframe. Her arms were crossed, but her knuckles were white. "Why now?" she asked. "Why so fast?" Joseph didn't look at her when he answered. "Because word's spreading. People are asking questions. Someone leaked that the girls survived. Garrett's panicking." Jed stared at the wall, the old map tacked there, edges curled from age. A red X marked the Ricks homestead, another marked the mineral ridge, and halfway between Sulphur Springs. That's where the land dipped low and pooled warm, where steam rose all year, even in snow. Maria walked over, her voice low. "Is there more, Joseph?" He didn't respond. "Joseph," Jed pressed, "what aren't you saying?" Joseph looked up, and this time Jed saw it. The guilt, the shame. "They have my nephew, Danny. Picked him up on a claim-jumping charge. He's just a boy, Jed. 17. They said they'd let him go if I rode up here. Told them where you were, who was with you. I didn't want to. I told myself maybe if I warned you first." Jed's hand clenched the mug so tight it cracked. Maria's breath caught. You led them here? Joseph looked down. They'll be on your trail by sunrise. Jed didn't move for a long time. Then he stood, walked to the map, and studied it in silence. Joseph spoke again, his voice quieter. I didn't want to betray you. But Danny's all I got left. You didn't betray me, Jed said finally, voice like gravel. You bought us a warning. That's the only reason any of us still have a chance. He reached for the tack box and pulled out a rolled blueprint, something he'd kept from his days building trails with the Corps. He unrolled it next to the old map. Sulphur Springs has natural cover, caves, high ledges. That's where we make our stand. Maria moved closer. Can we hold them there? Jed looked up, eyes sharp. We don't need to hold them. We just need to outlast them. Then what? Joseph asked. Jed's gaze hardened. Then I ride to Copper Falls. With the girls. With the deed. With the truth, silence hung thick in the room. Then Maria reached down, placed her hand on the map beside his. We'll be ready. Jed nodded. Wake the children at dawn. We'll travel light. Leave the cabin by first light. Joseph stood to leave. You sure this is the place? Jed glanced out the window, where steam from Sulphur Springs rose into the moonlight like smoke from a long-dead fire. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we make our stand at Sulphur Springs. The land around Sulphur Springs hissed with low steam rising from fissures in the rocks. Pools of mineral water bubbled softly beneath jagged ledges, and the scent of salt and sulfur drifted in the air like a warning from the earth itself. Jed stood at the edge of a shallow ravine, scanning the broken terrain. The place was just as he remembered it, natural cover, choke points, escape routes. But it wasn't the land that would win them time. It was how they used it. By midday, Maria had hauled crates into the western cave and stacked them into a crude barricade. She loaded the Winchester herself, fingers steady. Diego and Uni stayed hidden behind the stone outcrop nearby, watching every move. Joseph, still limping from the ride, staked out higher ground on the ridge with a pair of old binoculars and a battered carbine. Clara stood beside Jed. Her rifle was too long for her arms, but she held it firm across her chest. She didn't look scared anymore, just focused. I don't want to shoot anyone, she whispered. Jed knelt down to her level. Then don't. Just protect your sister. That's all you have to think about. She nodded once, jaw tight. The wind shifted, carrying voices, distant but growing. They're here, Joseph called from above. Jed turned to the others. Positions. Now the next few minutes moved slow as molasses. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. Then came the first crunch of boots across gravel. 8 riders entered the basin below, moving with practiced formation. Their coats were black, rifles across their backs. One man dismounted first, tall and broad, with silver buckles flashing in the light. Garrett. He looked around, hand resting on his revolver. Stone, he called. We know you're here. Jed stayed hidden, crouched behind a stone wall with Clara. Come on out, you son of a ghost. I've got something of yours. He raised his hand, and that's when they saw her. Clara. Not the real one. A trap. The girl in Garrett's grip had the same dark hair, same size, same dress. But Jed knew instantly it wasn't her, and so did Clara. They found another child, she whispered. They're trying to make us show ourselves. Jed whispered back, Hold. Garrett laughed from the basin. You're protecting orphans, Jed. What kind of man are you now? Thought you used to burn towns like this. Joseph fired the first shot, a warning. It split the air and slammed into a rock beside Garrett's boots. His men scattered, ducking for cover, shouting orders. Then Clara rose. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed high, cracked a bullet through the sky so sharp it echoed like thunder. It was enough. The false hostage screamed and ran. Garrett swore and grabbed for his gun, but then Sheriff Murphy rode into the basin behind him. "Hold your fire," Murphy shouted. "Hold it!" The guns fell still for a moment. Garrett turned, shocked. "What are you doing?" Murphy's horse pawed the dirt. "We were supposed to be protecting the claim, not murdering children." "You're bought," Garrett growled. "No, I just stopped listening to devils." Garrett pulled his pistol and shot Murphy off his horse. Chaos erupted. Jed sprinted toward the basin, drawing fire away from the ridge. Maria covered him from above, shooting twice and dropping one of Garrett's men where he stood. Smoke filled the ravine. The sulfur steam turned blood red in the light. In the chaos, Clara vanished. Junie screamed from the rocks. Jed turned and froze. Garrett had Clara, a real gun to her real head. His face was wild now, dirty and twisted with hate. "Come on out, Jed," he shouted. "One move and I put her in the ground." Jed stepped into the open. "No weapons." He tossed his rifle aside, held his hands out. "You want me?" "I'm right here." Garrett pressed the barrel into Clara's temple. "You've made a damn mess of my business. All because of two brats and a woman who should have kept her legs closed." Jed didn't blink. "You want revenge? Take me." "Let the children go." Garrett's eyes narrowed. Tempting. Then came the shot. It rang through the ravine like lightning. Jed's eyes flew to Clara. She stood on her own. Garrett's hat lay on the ground, a clean bullet hole dead center through the crown. Her rifle didn't shake. "The next shot," Clara said, voice low and cold, "goes through your heart." The ravine was quiet now. Gunpowder still hung in the air, bitter and thick. Steam hissed softly from the sulfur springs, curling around the fallen like a final prayer. Smoke drifted from the shattered rock face above. Somewhere a crow called once, then again. Garrett was on his knees. Jed stood over him, chest rising and falling with the kind of calm that comes after you've faced down hell and come through breathing. Clara hadn't moved. Her hands still gripped the rifle tight, the barrel trembling now that the danger had passed. Jed stepped in, gently eased it from her grasp. "You did good," he said, his voice low. "Real good." Garrett spat blood onto the stones. "You think you've won something?" Jed looked down at him, the man who'd stolen land, burned homes, murdered fathers, and sent children into the snow to die. "I didn't come here to win," Jed replied. "I came to end this." Joseph emerged from the ridge path, limping and weaponless. He dropped his rifle into the dirt and raised both hands. "I've got no more fight in me," he said. "Not for a man like that." Maria appeared next, rifle still slung over her shoulder. Diego and Junie peeked from behind her, eyes wide but safe. The children had seen too much for one lifetime, but they were alive, and that mattered. Jed turned back to Garrett. "Get up," Garrett sneered. "You don't have the stomach." Jed stepped closer. "No, but I've got something better." From behind the trees came the sound of hooves, then boots, then a firm, clear voice that cut through the ravine like law itself. "This territory's under federal jurisdiction now." Marshal Harrison rode in with two deputies behind him. The badges on their coats flashed like truth in the morning sun. Garrett's eyes went wide. "This is private land. You've got no right." "Federal mining company filed fraudulent deeds," Harrison said, reining in. "And we've got 3 witnesses, including 2 minors and 1 former employee, who can testify to arson, assault, and conspiracy to defraud." Joseph dropped to one knee, head bowed. "He threatened my family. He said if I didn't lead him to the cabin, he'd hang my nephew." "We'll see justice done," Harrison said. Jed stepped back, his job finished. Garrett growled, "You'll regret this. You all will." Clara, standing with Junie and Diego, simply said, "You're not scary anymore." Harrison motioned to his men. "Cuff him!" He rides out at first light. Garrett was dragged to his feet, wrists bound. He didn't look back. He didn't speak again. By afternoon, the ravine was still, bodies buried, wounds bandaged. Joseph stayed behind, helping repair the trail. Maria began cooking again, humming soft tunes in Spanish while the children gathered sticks for firewood. They moved together now, like a family that hadn't been born by blood, but forged by fire. That night they sat near the spring, the stars hanging low and bright. Clara leaned against Jed's side, eyes half-lidded with sleep. "Papa," she whispered. He looked down. "Do ghosts get to rest?" Jed didn't answer right away. The fire popped. An owl called somewhere across the ridge. Then he smiled, slow and quiet. Only after they build something worth haunting. The first sign went up on a wind-worn post near the old sulfur spring. It was hand-carved, simple as a hymn. New Haven, population. 6 and growing. By late spring they had walls. A single schoolhouse rose beside a narrow chapel. Tents gave way to cabins. Smoke curled from brick chimneys. The scent of pine and fresh bread replaced the sting of gunpowder and steam. Jed stood at the edge of the ridge one morning, arms crossed, watching it all happen below. The town, the people, the second chances. Behind him, Clara ran barefoot through the soft dirt trail, Junie chasing with a ribbon in her hand. Diego trailed behind, holding a book too big for his bag. Maria called out from the porch of the schoolhouse, "Hats on before you get to class, all 3 of you." They obeyed, more or less. Inside the school, Maria had painted the walls with soft green. She taught reading in the mornings, history in the afternoons. The children adored her. Jed had never seen a place bloom under a woman's hands the way this one had. He wasn't a lawman nor a preacher, but the townsfolk had asked him to stay on. They'd said he had a head for fairness and a heart that didn't spook easy. So now he helped settle land disputes, organized supply lines, helped build fences. He became something between a foreman and a quiet sheriff, though he never wore a badge. The name Jed Stone still carried weight, but no one whispered it with fear anymore. Now it carried something softer. Trust. Joseph returned in early summer. He stepped off the marshal's wagon with a trimmed beard and steady eyes. 6 months of hard labor had changed the shape of his frame, but not the fire in his chest. Jed met him at the gate. "You back for good?" Jed asked. Joseph smiled. "If you'll have me." They shook hands, then hugged like brothers who'd been through a war and survived not just with bodies intact, but something like souls. "I heard Garrett's trial never made the papers," Joseph said later that evening as they sat near the fire. Jed nodded. "Marshall says he was transferred to federal holding. Then, nothing. You think he's gone?" "No, just hiding. Men like that don't vanish, but they fade. And this town, this place we've built, it won't scare so easy next time." By midsummer, Clara read aloud in the square, her voice clear and proud. Junie played the fiddle next to old Mr. Granger, who had joined the town from across the valley. Diego helped Maria stack books in the library corner, wearing glasses too big for his nose. New Haven had a bakery, a blacksmith, 2 cows, and 1 stubborn mule named Lenny. The kind of place that might survive, not because it was strong, but because it was kind. That evening, as stars blinked awake, Maria found Jed fixing the garden fence. "Do you ever miss the cabin?" she asked, brushing her apron with dusty hands. He looked up from the post, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sometimes. It was quiet there, no questions, just trees. You were quieter then, too." He grinned. "Still am." She laughed and sat beside him on the step. "Jed," she said after a pause. "Yeah? What would you say if I asked you to marry me first?" Jed looked at her long. His eyes crinkled at the corners. I'd say it depends. On what? On whether you'll let me keep my horse in the backyard. The sun hung low over the hills, casting a golden veil across the meadows that rolled behind the cabin. The land breathed easier now. The violence, the fear, it had been buried under rows of cabbage and corn, under the laughter of children, under the sound of a hammer striking nails for something permanent. Jed stood still on the porch, a rare moment with nothing in his hands. Just a quiet evening breeze and the warm scent of earth after watering. Inside the cabin, Maria's humming floated through the open window, joined by the rustle of skirts and the clatter of tin dishes being set aside. Clara stepped outside in her cleanest blue dress, hair braided with a ribbon Junie had picked from a trading post weeks ago. "Mr. Colby's here," she called. "He's setting up the camera." Jed looked to the edge of the yard where the photographer stood with his boxy contraption and silver flash powder. The man had traveled all the way from Pine Creek with a wagon full of glass plates, charging $1 a photo. For this, it'd be worth every cent. Junie came out next, dragging Diego by the hand. He wore boots too big and a collar he kept tugging at, but he stood proud all the same. Maria appeared last, brushing her apron down with one hand, eyes soft as she stepped beside Jed. "You sure we need a picture?" he asked, teasing. Maria nodded. "I want proof." "Proof of what?" "That we're real. That we made it." He didn't argue. Instead, he stepped into the frame. The children gathered in front, Clara in the center with her arms around her sister and Diego. Jed stood behind them, one massive hand on each of their shoulders. Maria leaned into his side, her hand resting over his chest. "Say cheese," Mr. Colby called. They didn't, but they smiled anyway. The flash boomed, and the moment was caught forever. Later, after the dishes were done and the photographer had packed up, Jed sat on the porch with Clara. The sky above was brushed in lavender, stars just beginning to show their faces. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in cloth. "What's that?" Jed asked. She unwrapped it and held it out. His pocket watch. The one he'd carried since the war, its silver worn thin at the edges, the chain nearly broken. He hadn't seen it in months, thought he'd lost it. "I found it under the floorboard in the cabin," she said. "It was ticking when I found it." Now it's stopped. Jed turned it over in his hand, thumb resting on the etched initials that had faded with time. The hands pointed to 614. "When did it stop?" Clara smiled. "Right when we took the picture." He nodded slowly, watching the sky change. Clara rested her head on his arm. Then, after a long, quiet moment, she looked up at him and said, "Get on my horse now." Jed blinked, caught off guard, but she was grinning, playful. "Sound familiar?" she said. He laughed, deep and low. "You trying to boss me now?" "No. I'm telling you we've got somewhere to be. Where's that?" She looked out toward the horizon. "Wherever we want. We've got a family now." He stared at her for a moment, then tucked the broken watch into his coat pocket, as if it had finally served its purpose. Time had stopped, because it didn't need to move forward anymore. It had arrived. Inside, Maria rocked Junie to sleep, humming something soft and low. Diego leaned against the wall, reading by lamplight. The cabin glowed like a heartbeat against the darkening hills. Out back, Jed had built a fenced garden with fresh soil and sturdy rails. They had planted potatoes, squash, and enough onions to make every stew cry. The barn held 2 horses, 1 mule, and an old goat named Elvis who refused to stay put. From here, the world didn't feel broken. It felt possible. New Haven was small, but it was real. People came now not just to escape the past, but to build something worth staying for. And every night, when the wind blew through the cottonwoods, it carried voices, some new, some remembered singing a quiet hymn of peace. Jed knew the West didn't need another legend. It needed someone to stay, to plant roots, to protect children, to love well, and maybe, just maybe, to haunt the right kind of memories. Tomorrow they'd build a chicken coop, and after that maybe a swing for the front yard, then a wedding, and then... Who knows? But for tonight the sky was clear, the land quiet, and the family whole. So if you've walked this long trail with us, friend, thank you. And if this story found a home in your heart, there's more ahead. Because the West is wide, and every legend starts with someone choosing kindness over revenge, a home over hiding, and love over fear. This is only the beginning. Subscribe to Western Legacy and ride with us into the next tale.